And we could all use a friend right now. So we've got a chat with three best-selling authors coming your way. If you love suspense, their books will have you turning the pages and guessing what comes next. It's straight ahead on a special edition of Nonstop New York. Hi, I'm Carol Anne Riddell, and welcome to Nonstop New York. We've got a special edition of our show for you today. These recent weeks have been incredibly difficult for all of us, and I don't know about you, but for me, books have been a great source of comfort and distraction. So as we look to warmer weather and some sense of normal returning, I'm thinking about great summer reads. You know what I'm talking about, those books you just cannot put down, whether you're sitting at the beach or in your backyard. Last month, we chatted with three best-selling authors who are masters at jaw-dropping plot twists. Kate White, who's out with her latest book, Have You Seen Me? And author team Greer, Hendricks, and Sarah Pekkanen, who recently released You Are Not Alone. Here's our conversation. Kate, Sarah, Greer, thank you so much for being with us today. It's terrific to see all of you. I hope you're well.
So far, so
good.
Excellent, excellent. Okay, so I gotta say, this is a little bit of a dream date for me. All of you are out with new books. I so enjoyed both of them. So let's start there. Kate, your book is Have You Seen Me? Tell us a little bit about how the plot unfolds and what it's all about without giving anything away.
a young woman in her 30s who's a personal finance journalist arrives at her office and she's forgotten her key card. She's wet. She's a little discombobulated and she gets someone to let her in. And then she realizes she's forgotten her office key too. So she hangs out in the conference room. But when her boss arrives, he says, "What are you doing here?" And she goes, "Why, do you need the room?" And he goes, "No, you haven't worked here in 5 years." So it turns out just quickly she's in a fugue state. She remembers nothing from that morning to the past. And after a trip to the psychiatric ER, she remembers who she is and everything, but she doesn't remember the previous 2 days. And she hires a private detective. She works with a therapist trying to figure out what happened. Was it something with her husband? And as time goes by, she realizes something really bad happened. She doesn't know what it is, but someone wants to make sure she doesn't know what it is.
And it is a page turner, I will say that.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, yeah, I really enjoyed it, Kate. Greer and Sarah, your book is You Are Not Alone. So tell us, this is the latest one that you two actually written together. So tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, this is our third book together, and You Are Not Alone is the story of a young woman living in New York City who's really having a rough time. She's incredibly lonely. She's living in an apartment with a friend, a male friend, that she's secretly in love with. He has a new girlfriend. She gets fired from her job, but she's really trying to kind of pull herself up, trying to turn around her life. And early on a Sunday morning, she walks to the subway station and she's pretty much alone on the tracks, but there's another woman who kind of reminds our main character of herself, standing a few feet down. And they lock eyes, the train pulls into the station, and the other woman jumps. And our main character becomes obsessed with her. And from there, it begins to get very creepy.
Yes, it does.
That's when Sarah and I say bum bum bum.
Yeah, exactly. You know, I have to ask you guys, where do you get some of these ideas? Because they are pretty out there. Anyone want to jump in?
Sure, I will. I mean, for Sarah and I, we're constantly listening to podcasts, reading newspapers, reading Psychology Today. We send each other ideas, articles all the time, and so inevitably these it's not like one thing that informs our plots, but it's sort of this combination of ideas, and then it just kind of goes from there. But we also talk endlessly. We say like, "What if?" So we egg each other on. So we start talking about one thing, and then it expands.
Yeah. Kate, what about you? Because you're doing this more on your own.
Yes, well, I use the what if technique too. It really works. And just like Sarah and Greer, I read a lot. I save links to all sorts of crime articles, and often I'm pulling it from a headline and working that germ somewhere. But with this book, Have You Seen Me? It just happen like a firecracker in my head, which has happened a couple times with books. And that's really exciting. You're just like, I have no idea where that came from. I like it.
So both these books are suspense novels, psychological thrillers, and as a reader, I love that genre. But what is it that draws all of you to it as writers?
For me, it's not only a whodunit and a thriller, but there's that psychology aspect of it where your protagonist may be tortured, obsessed, as Sarah said, just working through a lot of things and solving sort of a psychological puzzle about herself as well as the puzzle of the crime. And that adds an interesting element for me.
And Sarah and Greer, what about you guys? Like, this is definitely the genre that you have sort of made your name in as a team. But what do you love about it?
This is one of the reasons why Greer and I are such big Kate White fans, because her answer really applies to us too. We love that. We love psychology. Like, we geek out. We subscribe to Psychology Today. We love studyings. We can studies on, psychological studies on patients. We can really go down a rabbit hole of research, and we have to build out our characters until they're three-dimensional before we can really begin writing. We need to know everything about them. We can be walking down a street together and we'll point at a woman and say, oh yeah, Dr. Shields would want that scarf, or, Jess would walk that way or give that kind of look to somebody. And a lot of what we know doesn't make it into the book. We might know what kind of car our characters would drive or how they take their coffee. That may never appear in the pages, but we really know we're ready to write, and we have a deep understanding of our character when we can answer almost any question about them as well as we would about ourselves.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And another thing about both these books that struck me, and of course, I'm probably biased because I'm a New Yorker and I love New York, is that they're set in New York City. And I wonder about why New York City is a good backdrop for the stories that you're telling. Greer, maybe you want to jump in on that one.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I live in New York and Sarah lives outside DC, but she spent a lot of time in New York. So it's a landscape we're familiar with. And it's a landscape where you have there's so many opportunities. You have young people, older people, people who are all different careers. So just it's such a vibrant setting for us. And we also know it. So we love to sprinkle our books with like our favorite restaurant. Like we
Yeah.
both love Sfoglia. So we will sprinkle details like that in it as well.
Yeah. Kate, do you love New York for your books as well?
Can I just say I love Sfoglia? It's one of my favorite restaurants
We'll
too.
all have to go there after this is over and have dinner.
It's a day.
Yes, I love that. I love that.
I love New York as a setting because there's a lot of texture in places, but just as in You're Not Alone, it's not like they're writing about the Empire State Building. New York kind of recedes a little bit in terms of the touristy aspects, but you still get this wonderful texture of a city. And I hope I did that with mine too. There might be a reference to someplace like Lincoln Center, but it's not dominant. It's not a tour guide.
Yeah, there's a certain grit to it, I think, that lends itself to books like this. Your books are female focused. There are sort of female main characters, young women at the center of them. And there's a lot in the books about the relationships that those women have. So I'd love to talk a little bit about that choice. I mean, is that an example of sort of write what you know? Or why do you center on women in that way?
We want to write characters who are very relatable. You might recognize pieces of yourself in them, but our plots are completely manufactured. So we're definitely not writing about our own experiences. We're not basing our characters on anyone we know. We're really kind of building them out from ground zero. But we love the idea that we take an ordinary woman, a relatable woman, and we place her in an extraordinary situation that could happen to anyone. Hopefully it doesn't, because our characters often end up in a lot of peril, but that's really what we strive for.
That's sort of what I do too, that I worked in women's magazines. I love women. I have so many close women friends. I like the idea of thinking about how they tick. But I would say that I don't write bat crazy characters, if I could say that. I just can't relate to the books where the female characters are just so over the top, deviant and crazy and all that. That's I just not my thing.
Yeah, yeah. Now, you said, Sarah, that you don't really base your characters on real people, but I always wonder, do you not at sometimes interject little bits of yourself or perhaps someone you know into a character? I don't know, Greer, do you ever find little pieces of truths coming into those characters? Maybe not the super villainous ones, but some of them?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, even we're working on our new book, Sarah and I, and we were trying to come up with something that someone was averse to a food. And I have a dear friend who hates mayonnaise. So I was like, let's make this character, have a mayonnaise aversion. That's nothing. It's just a small detail, but it's just something, that you choose from, your own experience.
That's very funny. Kate, do you do that too?
Yeah, in fact, hold on.
I love it. We're going to show and tell, guys.
I love arrowheads, and I have kind of an arrowhead collection. And so at the last minute, I made my character in this book. At the end, you find out she likes arrowheads. So
Yeah,
sometimes I
yeah.
put some little thing in like that.
I think that really makes it fun. And Greer, will you let your friend know that the mayo aversion is attributed to her?
It's actually a him, and I already told him, and he laughed and loved it. So,
I'm
yeah.
sorry, Greer. That's the way you find out if your friends have read your books. You
Oh,
don't
that's true.
just see if they notice.
This guy is also is the guy who gave us a lot of our wine advice too, because he knows a lot about wine. So there was a lot about wine in our first book, The Wife Between Us.
Mm-hmm. So Sarah and Greer, I think, most of us think of writing as a pretty solitary profession, but you guys actually do it together. And I think people might be interested to try to understand how that works. So maybe you could just give us a brief explanation of that.
Yeah, I mean, and I don't know if it would work for everybody in the world. For some reason, Greer and I just have this very special chemistry as friends and as collaborators. And what we do is every day we get online together at 9 o'clock, as soon as the kids are in school, and we call up our shared Google Doc and we begin speaking over Google Hangouts. And we write every single line together in real time. It's very unusual. Most co-authors trade chapters, so they each take on a character, but we love to do everything together. And we'll just kind of talk through, we'll take turns manning the keyboard, we'll be writing things in suggested mode and kind of in the side. It's a very kind of a twin language at this point because we're so in sync and so in harmony.
So do you have lunch together every day?
We generally crunch while we're talking. We'll be like, I'm going to meet you in a second. I got to crunch into my BLT or whatever it is. So, I mean, at this point, we're like so comfortable with each other. We pretty much know everything that's going on in each other's households. We know all of each other's kind of quirks and little ticks. So it's pretty funny. It's like a marriage, a really good marriage.
We know like when our groceries are getting delivered, we know, but we also, one other thing that we also go and visit each other's cities every other month to try to, do that big picture plotting, whiteboarding too. We savor that time together too.
So Kate, what do you think of that? Do you think that could ever work for you?
Wow, I'm so intrigued because it is so different from like Ella Fair Burke worked with Mary Higgins Clark, and she said that they would trade stuff. It's just so different from what I've heard and fascinating. But I think that for me, I enjoy the solitary aspect. Though I have a reader, a woman who's a reader, and sometimes I'll just use her to kind of as a sounding board to help me riff on ideas, and I find that so helpful.
Yeah, I'm sure that is because I imagine you have to like break out of your own head at times, right, Kate, when you're just doing this for stretches by yourself.
Yes, and sometimes it's just sort of hard to see the answer. So this woman generally doesn't say much. I'll say, do you think she should do that? And then I'll answer myself, yes, she should do that. And she's there to kind of help me a little bit as a sounding board.
That sounds like me talking to my kids. Like I answer my own. So I'd love to talk a little bit about how all of you became authors. Sarah and Greer. So Sarah, you were a solo author. Greer, you were a book editor, and then you ended up together. What happened?
Yeah, so Sarah's debut novel was submitted to me when I was an editor at Simon and Schuster, and we worked together on 7 books. And like Sarah said, over the time, we just discovered we had a number of uncanny similarities. We both had studied psychology and journalism. We both terrible cooks. We both have brothers who are really close to. We're both named Robert. When I left corporate publishing, in the back of my mind, I wanted to write, but I really wasn't telling many people. Sarah and I had stayed in touch. I confessed the secret to her, and she said,
Let's write a book together. Why not? It was just a very instinctual response because, Greer and I are both very collaborative by nature, and I kind of felt like we could do something special together. That 1+1 would be 3 with us, and
Yeah.
I also didn't want to lose her in my daily life as an editor and a cherished friend. And when she told me she was leaving editing, I kind of thought, wait a minute, I'm not going to let you go that quickly. So I just kind of blurted it out.
It's a great story. It's a great story. So, Kate, you have written a number of books, and I actually read that you fell in love with mysteries after your first Nancy Drew, which I totally relate to because,
Mhm.
oh my gosh, I devoured Nancy Drews when I was a kid. But so you've written a lot of books, and fiction and nonfiction, some career advice, but also you were the editor in chief of Cosmopolitan magazine. I mean, wow. So, how did you go from Cosmo to being a full time author?
When I was in high school, I didn't know that you had to kind of pick a lane with what you did as a writer. I dreamed of writing plays and books and mysteries and being in magazines and being in newspapers. And then eventually, once I got to college, I realized, no, you got to narrow it down. And I won this contest called the Glamour Magazine Top 10 College Girl Contest, which was so much fun. And that kind of picked the lane for me. I went into magazines, but I always nursed this desire to someday write murder mysteries. And I did some best-selling career books during my magazine career. But finally, one day, I started working on a mystery, and I was the editor of Redbook then. And I had gotten about 4 chapters, and then my boss calls me in and says, "You're the new editor of Cosmo." And as much, I mean, that was a weird thing to have happened. And I wasn't much of a Cosmo reader at the time, but I loved the job. And initially, I put aside those 4 chapters, but I dug them out because I felt bad not having to not being able to do it. And I discovered that the nanny who I had died right in the beginning had died on a copy of Cosmo. So I thought, I'm going to take that as a sign. So I wrote 8 while I was at Cosmo, always with the idea that if I could put enough money aside, that I would leave while I still had the time to be a full-time author. So I gave them 2 years notice, which they stretched into 3. And then 7 years ago, I started doing this, and it's just so great to have the freedom. As much as I love my job at Cosmo, this is delicious.
Yeah, there must have been some things that were hard to walk away from at Cosmo.
Cosmo Beauty Closet,
Yeah.
uh, the 2 cars, the huge clothing allowance, the 24-hour car service, little things like that. Yeah, but magazines don't have that anymore anyway. So I would have had to kiss it goodbye sooner or later anyway if I stayed.
It is remarkable to me that you were able to write that much while you were doing that job.
Well, I tried to just be strategic. I got up, got in before my staff after I dropped the kids off at school. And then on the weekends, I wrote before they got up. And I think I was probably more productive because I knew I only have 2 hours before. It's like, are we having pancakes today? And so I would force everything compactly into that period.
I always think that that's true, though, right? Busy people, right? You when you want something done, you give it to someone who's already really busy. So I was hoping that you guys could all give us a little bit of a sneak peek. I mean, I know that you are with new books, but a sneak peek on what you're doing next.
So we're working away on book 4. We've written about 35 pages. We're super excited. And as we said before, we love psychology, and our new book is featuring a maverick psychologist.
Ah,
Yeah.
interesting. Kate?
Mine is sort of a closed house mystery, locked house mystery. It's about a family of 4 boys, sons, and their wives and one fiance who meet for a week at the family's estate in Bucks County, and death comes to Bucks County. And it's tentatively called The Sister-in-Law, which I just love that title.
I do too. I can tell I already want to read them both. So I have a question for you guys. That I think about this sometimes for myself in my own world. But as established, successful authors, what piece of advice would you give to your younger, less established, less successful selves? I guess, what do you wish you had known or someone had told you?
That's a great question. I mean, I think that I had a path, not exactly like Kate's. I wasn't editing any, magazines, but I was a journalist. And I think that to kind of dare to dream about writing fiction sooner. I'm very glad I had the basic training as a journalist, that I wrote for newspapers and magazines, but it would have been really wonderful if I had had a little more confidence in myself and if I had started writing fiction earlier. But having said that, I love the way it all unspooled. I love what I'm doing now. I love having Greer as my partner creatively. So maybe that would have changed where I am now. So in that case, I wouldn't have changed it.
Right. Yeah. And Greer, what about you?
Oh God, that's such a hard question because I
You know
think
it
that
is.
I feel like everything kind of happens in life for a reason. So I think some of it's like you end up doing things and those things inform your role as a novelist. So this has been such a great journey. And in some ways, I feel like I've appreciated more that it happened when I was, when I was 50. And people feel like I was like this overnight success, but I wasn't. I was a book editor for 20 years. So
Yeah. Yeah.
all
It's funny
that,
how that
yeah,
feels, right? Yeah.
yeah,
You because no one else can see everything that led to it.
exactly. Yeah.
And Kate, what would you say?
I would say worry less because so many of the things I worried about professionally never panned out. And a certain degree of paranoia is helpful because you can sometimes connect the dots and see, hey, this may happen. But I just worried about so many things. And I think a lot of women do still have self-doubts, underestimate themselves. They wait for the perfect moment instead of just going forward and doing it. And I think you just have to be as gutsy as possible and grab it and not worry about what anybody thinks.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because I was thinking about this question even for myself and thinking, I wish in some ways that there were things that I had taken perhaps less seriously, worried about a little less, but it's a very hard thing. It's an easy thing to say in hindsight, right?
Your career, I mean, your field, the stakes are high and it's easy to worry, but I can relate to what you're saying.
So I was thinking a lot about this in terms of your books. And I wondered if you guys think that it takes a particular personality type to write the kinds of books that you write.
Well, it's funny because Greer and I always say, people think we're kind of, the nice women, and we're very friendly, we're very collaborative, and all of that. But we write very dark, twisty
Right.
books,
Yeah.
obviously. So I don't know. Maybe we let it all out in the books. We kind of take on this kind of a little bit of an alter ego when we're writing, but we also egg each other on. Like we'll look at each other, go, "Oh, that was so dark. I love it."
Yeah.
So do you actually have a dark, twisty side?
Well, all I know is that when my husband read our first book, The Wife Between Us, he looked at me and he said, "You are a very dark woman." And it was like he had never seen me before. So,
Kate, what do you think?
I do think that people who write mysteries, there is in all of them of not cozies but thrillers, a fascination with that dark side. I always read the darkest stuff when I was younger. I give a dinner party sometimes during Thriller Fest, and it's usually Lee Child and Karen Slaughter and Alistair Burke and sometimes Gillian Flynn. And there was one night at the table, somebody started talking about Ted Bundy, and everybody knew everything about Ted Bundy. I thought,
That's funny. That sounds like quite a party, Kate. Wow.
oh gosh, it's fun. But when I realized, oh, they're all just as fascinated as I am with Ted Bundy, and I think that takes a certain kind of person.
I think that's great. And do you find that it's hard to shed that at the end of the day? Any of you, like when you're going back to making dinner for your family or doing whatever you're doing, is it hard to kind of let go of that darkness ever? Or do you just move right on?
I think it depends. I feel like with some of our plots and characters, they stay with you and they're kind of percolating in night. Like you might dream about them or dream about a plot. And then sometimes, you pour a glass of wine and have to make dinner for your kids, and there's just like you don't have the luxury of even staying in that moment.
Yeah, sometimes work just ends at work. Do you find the same thing, Kate?
I can really switch gears pretty easily, and but a glass of wine helps too. Yes.
Yes, I would imagine. And I imagine in doing the kind of work you're doing, the ability to switch gears is super important because you have to get out of that space for yourselves, right? And for the other people in your lives.
Or you would scare their pants off. Yes.
So, guys, I do want to ask all of you a final quick question as we've all been going through this together. Give me a sentence on what your social distancing sanity savers have been, all of you, please.
I would say exercise And then we've also been doing a lot of family ping pong tournaments.
Mm.
So that you've got to be really in the moment then when you're focusing on trying to beat your 15-year-old playing ping pong.
Yeah, well, that is not an easy task, not at all. And Sarah, what about you?
Family game night has been a ton of fun. We've been playing Boggle and Scrabble and Scattergories. And then just as a visual aid, this helps a little bit too during family game night.
I love that we are back to the show and tell, ladies. That is absolutely perfect. Do you find in family game night that it gets pretty competitive or not so much?
Totally. I have 3 boys, so it always gets competitive. It usually turns into a wrestling match, and I'm screaming, "You are not going to the ER today. I'm not taking any of you to the ER."
Kate, what about you?
Well, we just started a movie club with our 2 adult kids where we're going to then discuss on Zoom. But with my husband and I, it's just been lots of just really good food, paying attention to meals, exploring things about each other that we've never discussed before. So far, nothing frightening. And also for me, just keeping up my meditation practice, which I find so valuable, particularly now.
I think you're absolutely right. For me, it has definitely been exercise as well, wine, and my dog, oddly. Not necessarily in that order, depending on the day. All right, guys, thank you so much for all this time. I really enjoyed. I love seeing all of you. It was so, so fun for me. So take care, be well, and thanks again. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, bye, guys. We hope you enjoyed this special edition of Nonstop New York. We will be back next month with more stories starring our fabulous hometown. In the meantime, please follow us on Facebook. We would love to hear from you. I'm Carol Anne Riddell. Be well, and thanks so much for watching.